what we need to
That's
realize
right.
is, like, everything that's kind of happening is based again on what? Paradigm. See, I like that now. You see how we're doing it, right? Like everyone knows this is paradigms, right? So, like everything that we do is based on
Yes.
paradigms. Okay. So the paradigms are based on what? What are paradigms based on? Yeah, it's based on the past. What else? Be more specific. What about the past? The
Yes.
paradigm is not actually based on what happened. Remember that, yeah? Because we say it's based on past experience. Technically, yes, you're correct, right? But it's actually to do with the interpretation you gave to the past experiences. Okay. And your past
Yes.
experiences, if someone else went through them, they may have given a different interpretation to it. So it's not actually the past itself, it's the interpretation you gave to the past, right? We're clear on that. Okay. So what
Yes.
is the interpretation based on? What is the interpretation based on? Emotions. Okay. Do you have any ideas? Personality, emotions, all this. Fundamentally, remember what we said, right? The reason why we interpret things is usually to do with survival, right? Because we want to survive. So if we go through an experience, our natural instinct is to survive, and therefore we give it a meaning that will help us to survive. Does that make sense? Yeah. So someone goes on to a terrible roller coaster that they felt was horrible. They give it the meaning that this is dangerous, this is not good for me. Why? Because when I was on there, I felt out of control. I felt like my life was in danger and all of this stuff. So now I've given it the interpretation that, roller coasters are dangerous and being out of control is life threatening and this and this and this. Okay.
Yes.
So this is
Hmm.
all based on what? Everything I've just said now, what is it? Okay. But how did I create those feelings? What do I use to create those feelings? What do I need to create thoughts and ideas? So tell me, look, when you're saying this to yourself that this roller coaster is terrible, what is there? What are you using? I love these glasses, they are wonderful. What is that based on? How is that formed? That idea, how is it formed? That I just said to you.
Okay.
Perception. I like this. Everyone's like guessing. This is good. And when I say it, you're all gonna go, oh, obviously. Everything to do with your paradigm or your interpretation is based on language. Language is the key. You cannot construct an interpretation without language. Tell me an interpretation that you're going to do without language. Can you do an interpretation without language? You cannot. So the whole paradigm, the whole interpretation is constructed in language. And that is the key to paradigms, right? That it all comes down to the language you're using. It makes sense,
Okay.
right? It makes sense.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
everything I think about, like think about something in your head right now. Think about something, right? Anything in the world, Abdullah, think about something in your head right now, yeah? Anything. Tell me what you're thinking about. The book in front of you is huge, right? You see that? That's all language. Everything you've just done is about language. You try and explain that to me without language. You cannot. You cannot form a thing. Even when your brain thinks of an item, like you might say to me, oh, but I can do it without language because I'm going to use a picture. Okay. So when your brain pictures that, guess what? Your brain goes, that's a chair. So language is the key to interpretation and paradigms. Okay. Now take everything we've just said about language and interpretation and then think about this. Think about that. Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you guys understand what I'm saying? Think about what we just said, that everything to do with interpretations and paradigms, everything is based on language. And then think about this. Think about the fact that the Quran is language. Like the miracle that the Prophet has been given
Yes.
is
Yes.
actually language, right? And so that is so amazing because when you start to then use this to form your paradigms and you use this to form your interpretations, then your whole life changes, right? And that's why I say, like, if the staff of Musa alayhi salam was here right now, like, what would it do for us? I mean, it would change my paradigm a little bit. Like, I'm like, cool, snake, like thing, this and that. But it wouldn't change my paradigm in terms of the way that I communicate with human beings and the way that I communicate with Allah and the way that I do this and this and this and this. It wouldn't change that, right? So when we're going back to everything you're saying about, okay, class one, class two, all of this is based in language. So when you're saying to me, I have this class two experience and I feel this way and I feel this way and I feel this way, everything is based on interpretation and paradigms and language. Does that make sense? So if you want to change from a class two to a class one and this and that, once you start to transform the language, it will change the way that that thing occurs to you, the way you perform, the way everything about it, right? So imagine I say to myself every week before this call, I say to myself, man, I hate that call. I hate that call. It takes so much of the time. It makes me miss the France game. And I just hate being on that call. It's terrible. And the people are losers. And it's just the worst time of my whole week being on this call. Like, what kind of paradigm or what kind of reality am I creating for this call? Will that change my experience? Will that change my experience? Yeah. Like, imagine I use that language to describe this constantly to myself. It will change it, right? As opposed to if I say, look, this is the best time in my week. This is the most important thing in my whole week. I love being on this call. I love helping the people. The people are amazing. Those two different things, how are they different? They're different because of the language I'm using, right? I gave you two examples of things I can say to myself about the call. And you said to me that it would change my performance if I said those two different things. Is that true? Do you still believe that? Because if you don't, that's okay. Or are you asking, how do I achieve that? Like what I just said to you, those two examples I gave you, you don't think the feelings in those two things will be different. So let's get to the bottom of this one, yeah? You're going to a class, and in reality, it's very, very boring. And by me saying it's not boring, will it change it's boring, yeah? Exactly, yeah? Okay, very good. Now tell me something. You just said it's very, very boring. What is that?
So, yes.
It's a paradigm, right? So now you're saying it's boring, yeah? Okay. Now, where's your evidence for it's boring? Like, did you get a message from Allah saying this is boring, and now therefore this is actually truth? It's haqq. It's like completely true that it's boring. So why are you saying to me that the reality is it's boring? The reality is it's boring. Why are you talking to me like that? This is what the whole program's about, isn't it? That we need to realize there is a difference between the reality and our paradigm, right? That's the key to it. That you know there's a difference between reality and your paradigm, right? Or you don't? You do know, right? Okay, good.
Yes.
So now what you need to do is you need to look at that class which is boring, and you need to say, look, my paradigm of this class is that it's very boring, right? So first of all, when you now know it's a paradigm, what does that mean? First of all, it empowers you. Why? Because you think if this is just my paradigm, I can actually change my paradigm. How I do it, when I do it, all that's a different subject. But the mere fact that this is not reality and I'm not helpless and I'm just stuck in it and I just can't do anything about it now because it's the reality. When you know Allah has not told you in the Quran, this class you go to is boring. Allah has not said in a hadith, this class you go to is boring. So what is this? This is just Abdullah's own interpretation of it. Exactly, right? So then what does that mean? That then means that there is possibility there if you can realize that you're actually going through a paradigm. And then that possibility is then about you questioning. And this is what I'm saying. Then moving forward down onto how you actually deal with it, what do you do, all that's different. But what I want you to get from this is, firstly, there's paradigms involved. Secondly, your paradigms are based on your interpretations, and your interpretations are based on language. So if you go through a reversing of that, like you do mathematically with equations, you can actually get to the point where if I can use different language and tell myself a different story, I might feel a different way. And if I feel a different way, I may act a different way. Does that make sense? And this is why I'm saying that so much of the program is about mind your language. And this is why I'm saying to people like mad that confidence and communication is the key to your life. Because now, like if you're saying it's all language, then you're saying every single thing I see in my life is to do with the language that I talk to myself, the language I speak to someone else, the way I communicate. And that's why communication is insanely important. That's why the miracle of the Quran is actually the words of Allah in that sense, right? So this is what I'm saying, that the key to class 1, class 2, all these experiences is based on how you see these, the paradigms and everything around it. And so once you start shifting the language, you can then start to shift the paradigms and everything else that's involved in it. Does that make sense? I studied this stuff for years, and it still takes time, and it still takes reminding. And you got to remember that this is not something that you have to understand from your brain. Okay, what needs to, because look, I will explain paradigms to someone. If I sit down with someone, I'll explain this paradigms thing to them. They'll get it, right? But to actually use it in your life, and like when I'm speaking to my wife and I'm having an argument with her, for me to actually then go into paradigms and say, look, you're upset at this. This is actually a paradigm. This is something you need to be clear of. And that's the whole challenge, right? And that's where things like this weekly coaching call that comes in, because if you keep coming back here every week, and every week we're saying, look, what is it? This is your paradigm. What is it? This is your paradigm. After a while, your brain starts going to yourself. You know what? What is this? This is your paradigm. And then it's like, oh, okay. What do I do about it? What do I do with it? Right? But you have to do that repetition. You have to keep doing that stuff for you to kind of internalize and then use it, inshallah.